So the Buddha said, and I'm paraphrasing, don't believe any teacher or any book until you practiced and experienced it yourself. Don't believe any highly valued book or any highly valued teacher until you actually experience the teaching on yourself. And when you do experience it on yourself, make sure that it is true and sustainable and not just a flukes or a hocus pocus, right? So in today's video, I want to talk about skepticism and how can you go through skepticism if your goal is to find out something beyond yourself and something bigger than your own mind, which is limited by our Western culture and scientific thought. And and before we start, I just want to say that scientific thought and Western culture, there's nothing wrong, right? It brought us so far with our scientific advancements and with healthcare and medicine and with all the good things and the quality of life that we're living, not suffering with diseases and without sewage systems and being able to communicate over the internet and to fly. There's nothing wrong. Society and Western culture is not good or bad. It's just one evolution path of humanity. And that's totally fine. But if you're born into it, and if your mind is limited a little bit by the fact that anything and everything should be measured scientifically and should be proven scientifically, then we are a bit limiting ourselves for the other possibilities and the other evolutional paths of humanity that happen in other places on the globe, right? So let's go back to what the Buddha said. If you want to know what's true or not, if there's a teaching from a friend, from a book, from a teacher, from a religion, you have to practice and try it for yourself and see if it works for you. Maybe it's true for other people, but it doesn't work for you because you build differently and you're structuring differently and it just doesn't work. And that's totally fine. So if we're talking about, in this channel about shamanic journeying and some kind of mystical experience, touching the spirit realm, conversing with spirits, we get into this gray zone of science and linguistic, because science and statistical probability and all of these things apply to things that you can measure, right? I cannot measure the ocean. I cannot measure a river. These are just concepts. These are just constructs of our language to say there is a water flowing in something that looks like a constant pattern from a specific place to a specific place. This is a river. It's a part of a river and it goes to the sea, and the sea is part of the ocean. But how do you measure a concept? How do you measure love? How do you measure hate? These are concepts. How do you measure the sky? Just linguistic concepts that we cannot measure in science anyway, but it doesn't mean that they're not true. We all know what the skies is, skies are. We all know what love is because we feel it, we experience it, we see it, we have a connection with it through stories, through just watching it, through other scientific explorations. So what science is doing is breaking down these big concepts into things that you can measure. Yes, I can measure the quantity or the quality of the water inside the river. I can measure the sea level. I can measure the strength of the waves. I can measure how many curves are in the river. I can measure the speed of the water going down the waterfalls. I can measure how many stars are in a square meter of sky that I see, and in relation to the distance from the stars and the globe, I can tell you how many are visible stars in the sky night all over the planet. All these are things that you can quantify and measure in a smaller scale because you cannot measure such a big concept, right? You can't measure friendship. You can measure how many times we talk to each other on the phone, how many times we meet, how many gestures do we have, what type of body communication do we have, do we have nicknames. You can measure these small parts that makes up a friendship. And in this way, you can't really measure you know the connection and relationship with spirit or your spirit guide. It's only your experience, and only if it validates and proven for you. So first, what I suggest is that you realize that if it doesn't, if you can't measure it, if you can't prove it in a statistical model, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, like any other concept in humanity. And the second thing is that, of course, you have to experience it yourself. And it's like a chicken and an egg thing. You have to trust it a little bit to experience something, to get something in return, to trust it a little bit more, to try again, and have this start to build this relationship with your experience, that you trust it enough to experience and to try. And then it gives you something. And then you check it out, or you work on it, or you try to prove it, and then you trust a little bit more, a little bit more. And for me, I think personally, this process took almost 2 years of really trusting the messages that I receive while journeying, and making sure that they're not just in my head. And the two best ways of trusting the journey and the messages and the visions that you receive are, first, writing down everything. Any message, any task, any homework that you get from spirit, anything that you need to research, or value, or anything that you need to do, write it down, because it might come up within a few days, it might come up within a few weeks, it might come up in another year. But when you see it and you recognize it in real world, or something changed in real world in accordance to something that you already saw that might happen or that should happen, you know that you can check it out of your list. You can strike it down and say, ah, that was real. And you start collecting a record of all of these signs, all of these symbols that you actually see in reality, in real life, in ordinary reality. And I have a list of this in my phone from when I almost when I started to journey, because first I used to use a notebook, and then I realized that I need to be with this thing all the time in case it happens, so I just put it on my phone, and I have a little checkbox for every time I see something that actually manifests. And how do you make sure that you manifest these things is that you ask for them. If I'm asking about my career path and I'm getting an answer that I'm not sure of, what I'm asking for next is, what is the proof? What is the sign that if I see it in physical reality, I will know that it makes sense, that this answer was true and not just in my head? Okay? So if I see a certain path and I'm not sure if I should take it, and then I ask my spirit guide, what is a proof that I can see in reality that will make me believe this answer and trust it more? And then I see I don't know, red frog. Okay? Few days go by, 1 week go by, and I'm driving in my car, and suddenly there's a truck coming next to me on another lane with a symbol of a red frog on the side of it. I will know for sure that what I saw and what I received is true, because spirit helps manifest this symbol in reality for me to trust it. And then it's a process. I trust it more, I ask more questions, I get more symbols, I write it down. After a month I see that it happened, or something really manifested. I trust it more, I can ask bigger questions, I can receive more information, I can trust it more, until a certain point when I just trust it. And it's funny talking about trust, because the name of the webcam that I'm using right now is Trust. So yeah, it's a little funny thing for me to feel this kind of passion, and then seeing this word directly in my face on my camera. So when you write it down and you start receiving this information, checking out, you don't have to take it for granted, you don't have to go full force with something that you don't really believe it might be true, and it might be still in your head because you're skeptical, right? And you engage in this conversation and you write it down. Finally, for me it took 2 years. It doesn't have to be. I'm very stubborn. Maybe for you it's gonna be faster if you journey a lot and if you practice a lot, but for me it was like a bit, once a week, once every 2 weeks I would ask a new question and wait for the sign. And these things, if you do it gradually, slowly, you build your trust and you lower your skepticism, until one point you just know it's true. You just feel it in your body whenever you receive an answer, whenever you receive a message, you just feel it in your body, this type of expansion, this type of relaxedness and calm, that what you're seeing is true and valid for you. So just to wrap it up, I think I should give another example of what it means to be, in the spiritual concept of things. So if you're talking about the scientific understanding of the Big Bang and quantum physics, is that you have quantum entanglement, where two particles light years away can affect each other. When you manipulate one, it will manipulate the other, right? With no delay almost. So, what does it have to do with us? If you still, consider the Big Bang a physical thing, right? And I'm not an expert on any of these, but if you can see how all matter and all energy in the universe actually was in one place, in one time, so combined together, everything in the universe in one point with all this potential. So everything was entangled with everything had this one source, right? One point that we all came from, and everything was entangled with everything at the same time. So when the expansion happened and when the Big Bang happened, it doesn't contradict the entanglement of everything with everything else. Maybe some particles have more entangled, with others. Maybe one force is bigger than the other, but it doesn't mean that it's not any way connected. Like in the other spiritual traditions where there's a network of energy, there's a web of life, right? There's the constant communication and interdependence of all of the particles and all of the energies in the universe, because they all started from one spot and expanded. So we can still affect each other and we can still communicate via this entanglement. When something happens here in your imagination and you manipulate, right? In the quantum experiment, when you watch the particles, they behave differently than if you don't watch them. If you measure them, they behave like particles. If you don't measure them, they behave like waves. So this mind attention that we put in the journey, in the prayer, in the ceremony, in the mystical experience of working with the imagination and the subconscious and the vision, is changing something in the network, because everything is entangled and interconnected, in other words. And then maybe you can start relieve the skepticism and actually engage in something that might be practical for your life and for healing and for helping other people and to find your purpose, and communicate with spirits that can help you from very practical stuff to the very grand scale of things. But what I'm trying to suggest is this practice of writing down, trusting a little bit, receiving the message, waiting for the sign, trusting a little bit more, relieving the skepticism, and then your communication channels are clear and clean, so you can actually receive more and communicate more and expand your human abilities from a little bit limited Western culture mindset to more expanded without giving up anything. It's just expanding a little bit more.